was your first introduction to anime? It's a deceptively simple question that has the potential for a load of answers, and oftentimes you can figure out an anonymous person's age through the way they respond. 80s kids might have first experienced the medium through Blockbuster or Hollywood video dubs that sound like they were recorded in a warehouse. 90s kids had the CW, Foxbox, Toonami, Jetix, honestly way more TV options for this stuff than we do now, even if back then it was heavily cut down for American audiences. Personally, as someone born in 2004, the first time I can remember being exposed to anime was through Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds airing at 6 a.m. every morning on Cartoon Network. It was completely impractical, but if I didn't find a way to catch every episode as a toddler. And for the recent crowd, Crunchyroll, Netflix, or some other streaming service could have been the genesis for their interest in the format. It's all super interesting, as each generation of anime fan has their own stories about looking for more of the stuff across varying sources. But you're never gonna find an older anime fan, at least in America, than the ones formed in 1963 through NBC with the Americanized version of Tetsuwan Atom, or as you might know him in pop culture, Astro Boy. It wasn't the first anime to ever be created, not by a long shot, but it was the original to come over from Japan with a fully redone English dub. And what better to be first on one of the country's most successful properties from a creator so revered he's often called the godfather of manga, Osamu Tezuka. Outside of Astro Boy, you may have heard of him as the creator of Kimba the White Lion, Dororo, and Blackjack, but he was also a pioneer in the invention of anime style, taking heavy inspiration from Walt Disney to create characters with large eyes, which would go on to become a staple of anime later down the line. He was an incredibly prolific artist who had a major respect and love for American culture that translated into his works. So what better way to honor his legacy than do as Americans do best and create an incredibly expensive, modernized film adaptation of the property that completely changes up the source material to be more palatable for a US audience. Old Tezuka, man, he would've shed a tear, I'm telling you. Though joking aside, in all fairness, Astro Boy has been changed over the years to suit different audiences through updated anime adaptations, and it has had success in the West before, so it's not a hopeless idea from the get-go. Why not give it a shot? The film was in development hell for over a decade, but it wasn't due to a lack of funding or disinterest in the project. There were plenty of Astro Boy fans that, since 1997, have been attempting to bring the adaptation into reality, but despite that conviction, no one seemed to know how they wanted to do it. At first, it was planned as a live-action film, but considering Tobio's a character that runs around in boots and a swimsuit all the time, people could be weirded out by that. I mean, unless their approach planned to mirror the 1959 Japanese series where the actor is covered in plastic, I can understand why they'd have a bit of hesitation. Though in reality, it more had to do with Steven Spielberg's AI coming out at around the same time and they didn't want to look like copycats, but whatever the case, after long enough, the selected crew left and the production fell through. After that, there were discussions about an all-CGI film co-produced by the Jim Henson Company. Second verse, same as the first, took too long without anything happening, crew left, fell through. Genndy Tartakovsky was considered for a half CG, half live action film. Third verse, same as the first, took too long, crew left, fell through, mazel tov. It was like the film was stuck in a perpetual Mobius strip of garnering interest and finding the right crew, but then lacking the motivation to go further, so they'd keep cycling and cycling forever, never making it past the pre-production phase. That is, until an unexpected player entered the scene. In comes Imagi Studios, an unknown in the animation industry that somehow strikes up a 3-picture deal with Warner Bros. And after a success with their interpretation of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they wanted to make Astro Boy the start of a bigger trend at the company. But before they could go any further with the idea, which we'll get to in due time, the film seriously underperformed. Why? Other than the fact it was based on a property no one in the US had cared about for almost 50 years at the time, I'm not entirely sure. As far as I can tell, the marketing wasn't atrocious. At worst, it's sort of substandard. The studio wasn't unknown at this point, as TMNT had been a box office success. They had a pretty decent cast list, and in relation to the demographic it was going for, the only other film that rivaled it was Where the Wild Things Are, and don't misunderstand, that's a fantastic movie, but it wasn't a major hit either. And interest had already died sufficiently down by the time Astro Boy released, so what happened? How could it have bombed so hard as it did, including in its country of origin, Japan? I suppose the one option left to consider is the quality of the film itself, which I hadn't thought about, seeing as the 10th highest grossing film of all time is Fast and Furious 7. But maybe there's some validity to the idea that Astro Boy failed because it just wasn't all that good. Or was it? Doesn't look like enough people watched the film to give me an answer, so I'm gonna have to find it for myself, which all starts with asking what the hell this version of the property was trying to say. But before I get to that, I should let you know that this video is sponsored by Casetify, a phone case company that finally gives you some variety without compromising safety. There are a lot of phone cases out there to choose from, and I mean a lot, but none of them have the same kind of personality that Casetify does, which partners with over 300 exclusive international artists to create a wide variety of unique patterns from varying backgrounds, not to mention collaborative works for more mainstream appeal. And if you don't like the designs they've got, there are customizable options too to fit your preferences. I got a couple myself, so I can confirm their quality. And beyond that high standard also extends to protection. They've created cases with bounce technology so advanced it's said to be 4 times the military standard. And in part thanks to the little padded sides on my Ultra Impact case, I can drop it and it's perfectly fine. That's my actual phone, by the way, just so you know. Plus, even with an older model, they have plenty of options for me to choose from. So for those that haven't updated in a while, just as much for the newest models, it's totally accessible. So if you want to get your own personalized, super durable, stylish phone case from a wide variety of international choices, Casetify is there for you with a 15% discount when you go to casetify.com/juststop or click the link in the description. Thanks to them for sponsoring, and back to the video. So, disclaimer here, I have no extensive knowledge of Astro Boy or his many adaptations over the years. The franchise seems to have more of a monster of the week vibe to it than an ongoing narrative, so it's probably not entirely necessary for me to watch to understand all the changes, but I did read the first chapter of the manga, and as an origin story for the character, it appears the crew mostly used the first chapter as a blueprint and built off from there. So that should be enough, I think, to compare. And opening-wise, I gotta admit, it's actually better structured than the source material. Our main kid Tobio, whose name has been changed to Toby, cause America, is the prodigy son of a famous inventor living in a futuristic society built above the clouds that's heavily reliant on robots to do all their bidding. And Toby is incredibly invested in the tech, but after breaking into his father's lab to check out a new model meant for military use, it kills him. And I love this alteration, almost as much as I love watching children die. The whole premise with Astro Boy is that Tobio is a famous inventor's son, and after he dies, the inventor, Dr. Tenma, decides to bring him back to life as Astro Boy so he'll never be hurt again. However, the way Toby dies has completely changed. In the manga, it was a freak car accident. The event had no relation to Tenma at all in how it happened, but in the film, it's a building event. Tenma's supposed to hang out with Toby after school, but he can't because of the new robot, so Toby decides to go to Tenma instead and accidentally ends up in the robot testing room where he's killed before his father's eyes. It turns a shocking, unrelated event for Tenma into one he could blame himself as actively contributing to, and the extra characterization of Tenma not having the time to be with his son, as generic as it is, expands on his motivation for recreating Toby to make up for lost time, and that also conversely gives him a more appropriate rationale for eventually becoming dissatisfied with the replication. Originally, Tenma got frustrated with the new Tobio for not growing no matter how much time passed, since, well, he's a robot, and that's understandable to an extent. Wanting your child to grow over time and not getting that experience could realistically leave someone feeling disappointed and disillusioned with the idea that their child could be revived. But once again, the movie version takes a different approach that relates more directly to Tenma's guilt. His hope in reviving Toby in the first place is so they can get in on the father-son relationship he didn't have the time to develop before. But while this new version of Toby might have the same memories, he doesn't have the same behavior. It all links back to the everlasting energy Tenma decided to use as Toby's power source, which is made of pure positive energy, so it alters his personality to focus on creativity and fun, something that angers Tenma knowing his son wasn't like that. So now it isn't simply, why won't you grow, it's, why can't you act the way I want you to? And to me, that's a way more reasonable explanation. Though to be fair, Tenma appears to be a sort of villain in the original canon, so it makes sense that he wouldn't have the best motivation, but I think I prefer Tenma as a grieving dad instead of an outright villain. Makes it so the emotional core is stronger, and for the film, it works pretty well to create a situation that isn't his or Toby's fault, but can be understood and expanded as an idea over the runtime. Can Tenma accept this recreation of Toby with different attributes as he is, or does the guilt of thinking he's responsible for Toby's death keep him from being able to love an artificial shell? It's an interesting conflict, and I kinda wish it were more the central focus from beginning to end. But I understand that the second act is necessary to build his character and develop Toby, now Astro's, confidence. I gotta say, this movie has one of the most natural found family implementations I've seen in a while. Astro is a, well, boy that's lost everything he thought he had. His dad doesn't seem to love him, the government's after him, and he isn't the person he was led to believe he was. So obviously he'd be looking for anyone, anything to call his own or give him purpose. It's the perfect setup for a finding yourself story, and making his new friends orphans from the dilapidated surface world that have been forgotten and figuratively trashed the same way as Astro makes total sense. I love the idea. As individual characters, characters, they aren't all too substantive, but they get the job done of helping Astro feel welcome as a part of their family. Heck, the marketable robot dog wasn't even as obnoxious or overutilized as I thought he'd be. The real star of the show, though, has to be Hamig, who makes for a twist antagonist I wasn't expecting at first. He's a former inventor from the Cloud City that rebuilds robots, as we find out, to battle to the death, but before that, he's nothing more than a dude that takes care of all the orphans, and it's never revealed he does that for some sinister purpose. He's just a guy that does good and happens to also believe robots aren't humans, so they don't have emotions. He's a villain in the story for sure, but he's not an evil mustache twirler through and through. Before figuring out Astro's a robot, the guy's as accepting as the kids, and so it kinda makes me wish his transition between loving and not feeling anything for Astro was a little less sudden. Like the scene after he figures out Astro isn't human, he puts him in the fighting ring and hurts Astro with no remorse. In theory, it's an interesting twist that shows the disconnect between how certain characters feel about robots in comparison to people, no matter how human-like they are. But in execution, Hamig's motivation to start going full psycho almost immediately is totally unclear. Would it have been that hard to show him contemplating whether what he's doing is right or not? Maybe he's egged on by the crowd, no pun intended, wanting to see some action, so he hurts Astro and gets good reception? I don't know, just give me something here. Though to be honest, I understand why he's confused about whether robots have sentience or not. The film itself isn't too clear about it. We know that Astro has a mind of his own, seeing as he's got a brain to mimic his human original in every way, and the everlasting power source in his body helps the emotional department. But what about the others? All the miscellaneous robots of varying qualities, sizes, and purposes that either have or don't have their own fully formed consciousness. Astro finds a big, super old robot that has his own ideas and personality, so I guess it existed as a concept for a while now. There's a recurring joke involving a squeegee bottle and window cleaner robot that seem to think for themselves, and those two serve such minimal, specific functions it's kinda odd they'd get picked to be given their own thoughts. We get a glimpse at junky robot communists, so that would imply even the most worthless robots have sentience. But wait, what am I saying? How could I ever consider robots called Robotsky and Sparks worthless? That's comedy gold. Though seriously, these robots are supposed to be the lowest of the low, the junk. So if they have sentience, why are there supposedly robots that don't? Mainly I'm talking about the ones in the fighting ring that Astro himself brutally destroys over and over again. They function less like people and more like toys, so how do they work? Is it a matter of how they're built? What makes destroying them so morally fine when Astro's against potentially fighting and hurting the big guy? Where do we draw the line here? Or is Astro a big hypocrite that brutally murders sentient beings in a needlessly over-the-top painful fashion? Is that why we need robot communism? Personally, that last theory's the funniest, so I might go with it, but it'd be nice if you could give us the answer yourself, movie. Guess they had to cut that part out to fit in the giant robot fight at the end. That's also probably why Hamig wasn't fleshed out as much as he could have been. The writers had to make room for a super generic evil politician as the third act villain that turns into a robot and rages around, you know, because. Is he as substantive or meaningful a villain as Hamig could have been? No, he's as bare basic as they come. His only real drive in the film is finding a way to get re-elected at all costs, so he gives the military robot that super clearly evil energy source that's the opposite of Astro's, and he gets sucked into it. That's his story.
Wow, oh no, how terrible. That's just awful. How terrible. Oh no.
It doesn't have shit to do with robots or the ambiguity of morality that Hamig's does. He's there for a spectacular final fight. And I can appreciate a good old kaiju battle as much as the next guy. That's a part of Astro Boy's roots after all. And the conclusion afterwards of Tenma coming to accept him as a different but equally valid crime-fighting super son is cool. But it rings so hollow comparatively. The conflict with Hamig didn't feel as big, but it didn't need to be. And having an opposing father figure for Astro could have created such an interesting scenario of him choosing between Hamig and Tenma. I'm coming up with these better ideas left and right. Imaji, hire me. Oh wait, they can't hire me, cause Astro Boy sunk the studio to a point it could never come back from. Though I'm still struggling to figure out why. It's not great. I'd hardly say it's the best it could have been, had the film not stuck so close to the end goal of giant robot fight. But there are some interesting concepts in there. Astro's a likable protagonist you want to see happy. The stuff with Tenma is inventive and treads new ground for the franchise. On the visual note, it's not special. Occasionally it looks too shiny and untextured for my liking, but there are a good few decent effects in there as well. It doesn't match the quality of the studio's previous film, TMNT, which is a little baffling when it costs twice as much, but it's not so bad you'd be dissuaded from watching. Not to mention, I've watched way less interesting, way worse films overall. Could the critical reception have something to do with it? What were reviews saying at release? Wow, that's the most straight down the middle reception for a film I've ever seen. Rotten Tomatoes says, while it isn't terribly original, and it seems to have a political agenda that may rankle some viewers, Astro Boy boasts enough visual thrills to please its target demographic. Wait. Political agenda? What was political about Astro Boy? The fucking yuppie politician antagonist? The pollution and class messages in the background? The robo-communists? Is this why Astro Boy failed? Too much communism? This is why we need to stand together as the proletariats, my brothers. Viva la revolution! The Roger Ebert called it better than Kung Fu Panda, so... who can say for sure? I suppose it'll always be one of those failures shrouded in mystery as to why fate decided it should be unsuccessful. But what's interesting to me about the whole situation is that, because of its failure, we miss the potential for a whole new world of Japanese-imported American cinema brought to us by a Hong Kong-based animation studio.
Terrorist
The
attack?
financial district is in
Yes,
ruins.
they're out there, but they are.
What you're looking at right now is one of two trailers for a defunct film by Amaji based on the franchise Gatchaman, an anime series about ninja superheroes. There isn't too much information I can go off of in regards to what the film was going to do independently of the source material, but Amaji had been teasing it for a good while, and at first it was intended to be PG-13 or R-rated, which would have been pretty out there for an animated film in 2004. I don't know if it had reached the pure quality levels of our mainstream animated films we have today, like Sausage Party, and nothing else, but a man can dream, can't he? And a dream is all it could be, cause like Astro Boy, there were a ton of cast, crew, and idea shifts before settling on going for a full-length film that would have mirrored the small bit of footage I'm showing now. That and a 45-second teaser that was only shown at Anime Expo in 2009, so the footage is super grainy. In the end, all I can do is speculate, but from what I can see, it does appear they were attempting to keep the same general aesthetic and feeling while adding their own flavor to the project, which I'd say is the best way you could adapt a franchise from another country, in reference to the original material, but different enough to justify your own existence. That's sort of how I'd sum up my opinion on Astro Boy existing, and if handled right, it for sure could have been entertaining. Plus, they supposedly had Paul Dini, the co-creator of Batman Beyond and Freakazoid, as a writer, so yeah, I'm more than a little disappointed this ended up on the cutting room floor. Same with this potential film adaptation of another classic anime, Tetsujin 28, about a kid piloting a giant robot that never went into production. The clashing between old anime style on the robots and oddly realistic human characters is kinda jarring, but this is only test footage. And of course, I couldn't go without mentioning the one everyone's actually heard of before, Imaji's 2007 pitch for a Legend of Zelda movie. It's not technically anime, but it's from Japan, so same ballpark. And again, this has potential, but it never went through since Nintendo denied it, and after the Super Mario Bros. Movie, I honestly can't blame them. Still fun to think about though. Just imagine if Astro Boy was a financial success and these got created. It's debatable whether they would have turned out great, but you can't say there was anything else like it in theaters at the time. At first this was going to be a plain old review for the film with nothing else added on, but the more I researched into it, the more I wanted to additionally focus on why it might have failed and what got left behind in wake of the studio closing, since no one else seems to care. But I do. I do. I've been Just Stop, and you've been served. The court hearing is on Monday. Thanks for watching. Peace out.